And I find the reaction to Dan Morgan's hiring as general manager to be interesting. Now, this I'll admit that I could be guilty of being too extremely online, but there's this business of like, well, he's a Scott Fitterer guy, so therefore it's just an extension of Scott Fitterer. What do we do? Why did they even hire a search firm? And it's like, colleges do that crap all the time.
Yeah.
Basically, those search firms are stealing money. The three of us should get into the search firm business. I can see the thought behind the hire. I ultimately like the hire of Dan Morgan, and that will only be crystallized based on what Tepper does with the rest of the front office this offseason.
Oh, yeah. I mean, from the beginning, I felt like the search firm whole deal is obviously a grift. And I agree. If you guys want to go in on a search firm, I'm ready to go. Whenever Mac Brown retires, Carolina, go ahead, throw us some money. I'll give you a list of names of obvious candidates that you should try to hire, and then candidates that you might actually have a chance at hiring. But as far as like the whole deal goes, I felt like going to the offseason, a lot of the search firm aspect of this was about optics, optics that David Tepper was willing to listen to other parties and that he was going to take a step back. And it was mentioned in his search for a new soccer coach for Charlotte FC that he used a search firm, which would make sense. Soccer is a global game. You have a mass amount of people you could actually hire to be an MLS head coach. Now, when it comes to the NFL, I know that the games are played overseas, but let's be honest, it's a domestic game here in America, and your talent pool, it doesn't really stretch that far, especially looking at the failures of recent college coaches. So the hope was that maybe David Tepper would be willing to listen to this search firm. But I told people from the very beginning, David Tepper is going to do what he wants to do. Hiring a search firm, that may be all well and good on the surface, makes you think that he's going to change his ways, but he's going to hire someone that he's comfortable with. And hiring Dan Morgan shows that he's comfortable with Dan Morgan and understands that Dan Morgan was on board with moving up to get Bryce Young. So you had to find somebody that wanted to have Bryce Young as their quarterback. And I felt like that was a pro and a con of the job, that you have Bryce Young, someone who was highly thought of by the league less than a year ago. I understand how things worked out this fall with CJ Stroud and with Bryce. Your reverse situations, are they different? I have no idea. You were thinking that probably Stroud would struggle like Bryce Young did. Would it be at the same level? No idea. But you had to find somebody that wanted to work with Bryce Young. And then vice versa, it might make the job difficult because people might look at Bryce Young, look at his struggles, and not want the job. So on the surface, looking at Dan Morgan by itself, it's not the most inspiring hire, but it feels like they're going to do a couple more things to restructure the front office that'll get people a little bit more on board with Dan Morgan being here in the president of football operations and general manager role.
I will not be surprised if it comes to light that David Tepper actually had a conversation with our friend Tom Dundon on this topic. I would not be surprised.
Okay.
Because Morgan was in a revered player in the franchise, right? And was working for somebody else, just as Rod Brindamore was. And Dundon had to be kind of convinced that Rod would have his own ideas and do his own thing. And I think at this point, the smartest thing David Tepper could do is take advice from Tom Dundon. That's what I think.
Well, I've heard the hockey team is doing well. I don't pay attention to the NHL anymore, but Tom Dundon seems to, I suppose, have a good head on his shoulder. The hockey team is relevant out there in Raleigh after, it feels like, a decade of not being relevant in the NHL. I think he should be talking to as many people as possible, some successful owners. You would have thought, coming from Pittsburgh with the Rooney family and the success that organization has had, that he possibly would take some of the trends that they have used over the last decades. But we saw that Jimmy Haslam didn't do that when he went to Cleveland. So that clearly has not happened here in Carolina. It is interesting. Dan Morgan is his own man.
Right.
I understand that he worked with Scott Fitterer, but he also worked under Brandon Beane in Buffalo. And Brandon Beane has done a terrific job with that team. And he, of course, was here in Carolina. So it's not like he's the exact same person as Scott Fitterer. And having a football background, having played the game, he's going to see things differently than Scott is. I'm just curious. He was running the scouting department. How much of that is going to change now? They have not done a great job in the draft. They have not done a great job in evaluating free agents. And truthfully, until that changes, and of course, David Tepper being arm's length away, I don't know what exactly people should expect out of this organization. But I do think people should give Dan Morgan a chance. Just looking at it as one move, it's not the most inspiring considering he's been here through the 14-37 the last 3 years with Scott Fitterer as a general manager that yielded the worst roster in the NFL this past season.
How much do you actually assign to Scott Fitterer?
I don't assign. It's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean,
I
don't know the answer. I don't think Scott Fitterer was the man behind the curtain over there. I just don't.
No. I've had this conversation with my listeners as many times as possible. Try not to come off as an apologist. There are so many quotes you can pull. Frank Reich talked about that he wanted to work with DJ Chark for years.
Yes.
Clearly, that was not a Scott Fitterer move. Now, Scott Fitterer gave him the money. Now, it was only $7 million for 1 year. It's not like he went out there and signed him for a 3-year, $21 million deal like with Hayden Hurst or with a Miles Sanders. Speaking of Miles Sanders, a running back, the only running back to get a big deal this offseason.
Yep.
Why is that? Because Deuce Staley was here as the assistant head coach. The Panthers have continued to talk about how this is a collaborative effort when it comes to bringing in players, which might be part of the problem. It's possible that you just need one singular voice there in the front office to put their foot down and say, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm not interested in having a player who's traveled to 3 different teams and a player like Hayden Hurst who just can't seem to stick anywhere, even though he had a career year in Cincinnati. Let's get guys that can fit the scheme that you want, but also players that make sense and fit our scouting mold. I don't think it's all been in Scott Fitterer. David Tepper clearly is an active participant in what's gone on. The Robbie Anderson deal, that has to be Matt Rule. Like Frankie Louvu, people want to assign that to a shrewd move by Scott Fitterer. Actually, it was Phil Snow, the former Panthers defensive coordinator, who was watching film on Sam Darnold in the Jets, who discovered Frankie Louvu and felt like, oh, he could fit in our defense as a backup and he could help us in special teams. That was in Scott Fitterer. There are some moves that were, but I can't blame or really assign praise to the majority of things that have happened here in Carolina. It's just he's a fall guy.
To me, it's a binary conversation when it doesn't need to be. And I want to be, and look, it could blow up in my face as it relates to being somewhat optimistic about David Tepper learning. Okay, like you cannot get to where you are in life and be so stubborn that you don't kind of change. So in a lot of ways, the moves have always made sense. It made sense to fire Matt Rule. They should have done it earlier. It made sense if you truly believe Bryce Young is the pick. He is the guy. Well, then you have to get rid of the head coach that is not helping his development. So firing Frank Reich when they did made sense. Just jettison that stuff. So it's almost like, okay, if you're incrementally learning where you need to be and you surrounded yourself with a bunch of football people, but then you found out, well, that's too many voices. So I'm really curious, and we'll get out of here on this because I know you got to get to work. If David Tepper looks at what's going on at San Francisco, right, where, John Lynch, former player, evaluator, but there's a buffer there. I know Joe Person wrote about this too at The Athletic. If that's the direction David Tepper is going in, then I'm actually optimistic about things going right. The issue is, and this is a point that Giglio likes to point out all the time, the Panthers need this fast forward button. The problem with going fast forward is that there are and Mike Kay's made this point from the Charlotte Observer, there are so many compounded mistakes that the Panthers have made through these 2 regimes that it doesn't matter who the GM is. It doesn't matter who the coach is. There's a lot of untangling of mistakes they're going to have to work through to be competitive again in the NFC South.
Oh, absolutely. And the good thing is you are in the NFC South. That still is in flux. I suppose Baker Mayfield's going to stay in Tampa for at least another season. Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, whoever takes the job in Atlanta is going to have to find a quarterback. New Orleans, same kind of situation there. Are they going to stick with Derek Carr? The fact there's not a quarterback in this division. If this was the AFC West with Patrick Mahomes, then you're screwed. Like you're just, it's just not going to work out for you at any point in time. Same case if you were in the AFC East with Josh Allen and Tua forever, however you want to feel about Tua Tagovailoa, this team that's been the playoffs back years. Like you're not in a good situation. Like this is still a division where they're trying to figure out which head coach is going to stick around for a long term because Todd Bowles, who knows, he could be on a chopping block next season if things don't go right. So the Panthers at least have that going for them. I do like the reporting and the idea that they're going to have that, I guess, intermediary as an EVP of football operations, senior vice president, however they're going to title it. And it sounds like the Brant Tillis from Kansas City is the lead to get that job. And that will be something I think that will get fans excited about the potential roster building. But this is not going to be a build that happens this offseason and this team turns around and wins 11 games next year. There's a lot of questions with the offensive line. All 5 of the projected starters going to the season are under contract. And people talk about, just move Ike Ekwonu into guard. Okay, well, who are you going to get at tackle? You don't have a first-round pick. Are you going to use pick 33 on a left tackle. You've tried to get a second-round pick at tackle before. Greg Little, that didn't work out. You tried to go out there and go bargain hunting and get a left tackle in free agency. Russell Okung, that didn't work out. Byron Bell, Nate Chandler, Mike Rimmers, then blindside Michael Orr. They spent a decade trying to find left tackle. So, yeah, go ahead. Move Ike Ekwonu in, and that solves everything. What do you do if Austin Corbett, who when healthy is your best offensive lineman, arguably, with Taylor Moton? He's under contract, but then he's coming off of back-to-back major knee surgeries. Brady Christensen. It's not as simple. You got to figure out the offensive line. You have no weapons. And people talk about getting T. Higgins or Calvin Ridley or Michael Pittman Jr. If the Colts, the Jags, and the Bengals are smart respectively, they're not going to let those guys just walk in free agency. The Jags are already going to lose a pick anyways. I would think they would tag him and potentially trade him. You got to figure out what to do with Brian Burns. And if you have to tag him, you only have $30 million of salary cap, according to overthecap.com. That immediately goes back to $9 million before making any other moves. So yeah, it's gonna be a build. It's a good step in the right direction to have a Brant Tillis to handle something like the salary cap and contracts, and to be directly reporting to David Tepper to space out personnel and allow Dan Morgan and I assume Adrian Wilson and Cole Spencer, as they've been sitting in on some of this coaching interviews as well in that department. I question whether that should also completely be wiped away below Dan Morgan, but does not appear to be the case. It's going to be a long build. Absolutely. No matter who took the job, it was going to take some time to get this roster to the point where it could be consistently competitive. And that's what David Tepper talked about, having sustained success. Yeah. Right now, I don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be a while. Who's gonna be the coach?
Well, it's not going to be Brian Callahan. We know that.
No, it's not going to be that. It's probably not going to be Ben Johnson. So,
well, that was the thing too. They're going to have to wait for
they are.
Ben Johnson and for Todd Monken and Mike McDonald, the Ravens offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, respectively. I was always curious because Brian Callahan is supposed to interview on Tuesday, and I don't know if Brian Callahan, as we've seen, clearly was not going to be available for them by next week. If Ben Johnson is truly who they want, okay, you're going to be running the risk of potentially losing out on Raheem Morris. I think Ajero Verrill will still be there. I feel like Seattle's probably going Dan Quinn, right? And in Atlanta, it seems like maybe Bill Belichick.
Maybe. I mean, how many interviews do you need with Bill Belichick at this point?
Who knows what they're trying to do there?
Also, why have the Panthers not contacted Bill Belichick? Why have the Panthers not contacted Jim? Or they probably don't want.
Hold on. I do credit David Tepper here. He told us when he fired Frank Reich. Didn't say why he fired Frank Reich. We still don't know why Matt Rhule was fired, by the way.
Leave that up to speculation.
He did say that he wanted a coach to be here for the next 20-something years that would eulogize him at his funeral. I don't know if Bill Belichick is going to last 20 years as a head coach. So it's the step in the right direction. He's actually doing what he said.
He's following through, Julian.
Show him the shirt. Show him the shirt.
What shirt?
Your shirt.
What? Positive vibes only.
Yeah, see?
Positive vibes only, man. That's what it's all about. All right, Julian. We appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you later.
All right.